I don't know. Never heard back from anybody.
Because Vince said Friday night, Wednesday night, Monday night available.
Yeah,
So Friday night would not be possible.
Friday's Sabbath. You're working
Right.
anyways, right?
No,
Or you're off?
weekend. Supposed to be.
Oh, Saturday, Sunday?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Okay, seem to be live. I don't have the video any longer.
What do you mean?
To make it easier as far as the streaming, took off the video.
Can they hear you?
Yeah, it's the audio is different from the video.
Oh, okay.
In fact, it should be on right now.
Mm-hmm.
So in case you're listening, welcome to SYMF Yeshua Messianic Fellowship. We are just starting up our Galatians study on Wednesday. Today is what, the 17th of June, 2020, in case you're curious. So just getting started and getting all the details settling in, so we'll have to see send off a message. Okay, get that done. Okay, so still getting that warning message that it's not receiving enough video to maintain smooth streaming. However, since I'm not running my face any longer on the video, that should clear up a lot of the congestion issues. So I'm hoping that will do. I'm getting flashes of I think the screen that's up right now. There we go. That should be it. Okay. Are you listening in on that? Just out of curiosity, what kind of delay we have? Yeah.
Let's see if I can get to it.
I'm sorry if you don't. It's all right.
No, I forget how usually Abigail does it for me.
Oh, okay. Well, it's not quite 6 o'clock yet. Still showing 5:59 on my computer, so I'm got started a few minutes early so we can make sure everything's working. So far, it appears to be working. I'm not getting the clocking that it used to do when we were running the face on the video.
What do you put? Simchat Yeshua?
Simchat Yeshua Messianic Fellowship, West Covina. And there should be a live chat available on that. There we are. So we're just sort of treading water until the proper. Let's see. Oh, that was that. That's what I'm looking at. Okay. Okay, now it's starting. Oh, okay, it clocks a little bit, then it runs okay. Looks like it is running late, maybe about 30 seconds or so. It's 6 o'clock right now. And according to my number, there's one person on. Okay, so 6:01 now, just trying to keep track of so far it seems to be running a lot smoother. It still clocks a little bit, but only for about a second. Then it seems to run smooth for a while. So maybe taking my face off the video was a big benefit. Still not finding it.
Yeah, I found my Facebook site. It keeps going to SYMF as in the other place.
Yeah, you need to add West Covina to the search. Huh.
Doesn't make sense.
No.
No, that's not us.
Yeah.
Someone else. I see our SYMF Torah.
Okay, Simchat Torah is the old site that Mark Rooney has. Okay. All right. We've got 2 people on now. Okay, still waiting for people to file in. Sorry about all the technical issues. Gone even one step further with the technical questions or technical issues. This time around, if you notice, you don't see my face because we're trying to cut down anything that's interfering with the smooth flow of the lesson, and so far, need to find out for sure. What is there that we have for people. Still haven't heard back from anybody as far as time delay. And maybe a couple more minutes. We'll wait and see who makes it in.
Galatians 2C.
2C. Now, there's one from last week. We tried a couple times and it didn't work, so there's one for today that I labeled as third try.
Okay, I got in.
Okay.
Third try.
Ah, you are number 3. Okay. So there are, I guess that's you and one person, 2 people that are not responding.
It's not blocking for now.
Okay. It's 6:06 right now. What's it say on yours that you're watching? Same? So that, maybe it tightens up the response time a little bit. Good. Maybe the technology is working for a change. All right. it's back to 2. Didn't work?
It's there.
Oh, okay. Okay, let's go ahead and get ourselves going here. All right. This is the ongoing study of Galatians, the book of Galatians. We're in chapter 2, and this is to see our third segment of Galatians. And I want to take a little bit of a running start. We're going to be in just verses 11 to 14 today, but I want to take a little bit of a running start coming into our reading for the day, and basically just to sort of set the stage. Shaul, or Paul in English, if you beginning of the chapter, actually from the beginning of the book so far, he's explaining why he has the credentials to write the letter that he's writing to the Galatians. And we're into a more historical section. Actually, the whole thing's mostly historical section, where Paul is relating the steps that he got through to where he's at writing to the Galatians and telling what's really the truth. And we're going to start at verse 6 in chapter 2. We'll pick up from there and then take a running start into our section for the day. Moreover, those who were the acknowledged leaders, what they were makes no difference to me. God does not judge by outward appearances. These leaders added nothing to me. Let me backtrack just a little bit, because this is commonly not fully understood. Those who are the acknowledged leaders are not talking about the Jerusalem congregation so much as the people showing up in the Galatian region claiming they were from the Jerusalem congregation. Remember, the big difference is they were claiming that. Doesn't necessarily mean they really were. Okay? Verse 7, on the contrary, they saw that I had been entrusted with the good news for the uncircumcised, just as Kepha, that's Peter, had been for the circumcised. Since the one working in Kepha was to make him an emissary to the circumcised had worked in me to make me an emissary to the Gentiles, so having perceived what grace had been given to me, Yaakov, Kepha, and Yochanan, the acknowledged pillars of the community, extended to me and Barnabas the right hand of fellowship, so that we might go to the Gentiles and they go to the circumcised. Their only request is that we should remember the poor, the very thing which I have spared no pains to do. Okay, that's kind of our run-up. What's happening is Paul's explaining how we got to here, and then he takes a little sidestep, which we're going to cover in our section for today. Basically, to show that he has the formal authority from the congregation, unless, if having God's direction for you to do this isn't enough, of course, people look for human leaders to add to what God has ordained. Nonetheless, then we have a little side story here in verse 11 that shows that Paul did indeed have a certain amount of stature and status within the community. And so let's pick up on verse 11, and we'll read our segment for the day. Furthermore, when Kepha came to Antioch, I opposed him publicly because he was clearly in the wrong. For prior to the arrival of certain people from the community headed by Yaakov, that's in parentheses, we'll talk about that. He had been eating with the Gentile believers, but when they came, he withdrew and separated himself because he was afraid of the faction who favored circumcising Gentile believers. And the other Jewish believers became hypocrites along with him, so that even Barnabas was led astray by their hypocrisy. But when I saw that they were not walking a straight path, keeping in line with the truth of the good news, I said to Kepha right in front of everyone, if you who are a Jew live like a Goy and not like a Jew, why are you forcing the Goyim to live like Jews? Okay. And that's really our segment. There's plenty to talk about here. There's a big mouthful going on. And so let's just take apart this little bit and we'll talk our way through it. Verse 11, now when Peter had come to Antioch, I withstood him to his face, because he was to be blamed. The word now there is, in the Greek word is de, which means but, moreover, and it's a connective, not necessarily now as an instantaneous or right this moment, but rather it's a conjunction, but moreover, and so on. Okay. According to let's see, there's a change. So let me back up. There is a change in the welcome from the Jerusalem congregation, including Kepha, to having to confront Kepha while he was in Antioch. Okay, now this is not a change from Jerusalem per se, as is a change in the welcome and the perception of the welcome. Let me fix that as long as I'm here. In the change in the perception of the welcome. Okay, one of the nice things about using a live document when I'm talking out of this is I can fix things and hopefully make better sense. There's a change in the perception of the welcome from the Jerusalem congregation, including Kepha, to having to confront Kepha while he was in Antioch. Okay, that kind of, maybe that makes it a little bit better. Then in commentary, according to the present chronological scheme, Peter's arrival in Antioch occurred following Paul and Barnabas' return to the city from their extended travels in southern Galatia. Okay, so according to the commentator, it appears maybe that Paul had been up to Galatia, teaching up there, and then came back to Antioch, and there met Kepha face to face, where Kepha had come in and was hanging out with Gentiles, not having a big issue with that until the Pharisees, who were believers, came and tried to say, oh, no, you can't be unclean like they are. You have to be, kosher like us in every imaginable way. Not the kosher in the biblical sense, but kosher in the Pharisaic traditional sense. Okay. Antioch is a major city with a large Jewish population with at least 3 synagogues. Okay. Dr. Stern's commentary, Shaul's confrontation with Kepha in Antioch illustrates dramatically that Shaul ranked equally with the other emissaries. Indeed, with Kepha, the leading emissary, a major purpose of the book of Acts is to demonstrate the same thing. Hence, the Greek word de at the beginning is rendered furthermore, not but, as in most translations. Furthermore makes the incident with Kepha the keystone in Shaul's defense of his own authority as an emissary, which had been the central issue since chapter 1, verse 10. He is saying that his authority was so well-founded that he opposed publicly the leading emissary, Kepha. Shaul did not do so in order to elevate himself, but because Kepha, a role model, was clearly in the wrong, and the Galatians needed to be warned. Okay, this is Shaul's way, Paul's way of saying, um, you know, my status as an emissary is not questionable because it wasn't part of the argument with Kepha in Antioch. At least it's not recorded that Kepha challenged whether or not he was properly an emissary sent by Jerusalem or an emissary sent by Yeshua himself, but rather it was what went wrong. Now, of course, since Paul is doing giving the entire conversation, he's putting in the stuff that the point he wants to make, which is that he had the ability to confront Kepha for something that he was doing wrong. Okay, and not only confront Kepha, it was confronting him to his face. In the Greek, that is kata prosopon. Again, my Greek is horrible, so down from the face. It's perhaps a Greek version of panim el panim, face to face, which is in the scripture that God says that Moses he speaks to panim el panim, face to face. A commandment to rebuke sin, Vayikra, Leviticus 19:17, and hearkens to the process of congregational discipline as commanded by Yeshua in Matidyahu, Matthew 18:15. And these verses I put in. Do not hate your brother in your heart, but rebuke your brother frankly, so that you won't carry sin because of him. Rebuke your neighbor there is to speak to him face to face. Okay, the phrase face to face often has a connotation of confrontation. Not always, because we know that God spoke of Moses saying, him I speak to face, but that was not a confrontational statement at the time that was spoken by Hashem. It was, though, used often, though, in a confrontational manner in the Bible. And yes, not Yeshua, but Moshe and Hashem did have a few words back and forth that were confrontational. So you could hearken that idea that it's they did have confrontation, but God never regarded that as sin or problematical. Okay. Anyways, Matthew 18:15. Moreover, if your brother commits a sin against you, go and show him his fault. But privately, just between the two of you, if he listens to you, you have won back your brother. This has to do with congregational discipline. Something's bad enough for someone to be removed by the congregation, but this first step is go face to face. Okay, and that's the intent of the meaning here. Okay, this suggests Shaul at first confronted Peter in private, which would be the proper way to address a fault. Okay. Rabbi Eliezer said, "Let the honor of thy let the honor of thy fellow be dear to thee as thine own." Out of Mishnah Avot 2:10. The point is, you want to protect the honor of somebody even when you need to correct them, and if you can win them by confronting them in private, then you spared that person a whole lot of grief and anguish and embarrassment. So it's better to do it that way. That's why Yeshua even gave us these directions. Okay, let's move on to verse 12. For certain men came from James. For before certain men came from James, he would eat with the Gentiles. But when they came, he withdrew and separated himself, fearing those who were of the circumcision. Certain men, the Greek there is tis, meaning a certain or a certain one. I don't know if it's because I'm looking at the wrong spot when I was looking up the Greek, because the definition is singular, whereas the text appears to be plural. I may have to go back and fix that. Okay, but they're from James. Jacobos. Apo Jacobos. James, of course, means supplanter in Hebrew, but the issue is this. The statement infers it's from the community headed by Yaakov, literally from Yaakov. But what does this mean? One possibility is that these certain people were sent by Yaakov, head of the Messianic community in Jerusalem, but clearly Yaakov did not send them because their insistence on observance of Jewish custom to the point of Jews and Gentiles not eating together contradicts Yaakov's offering Shaul the right hand of fellowship. It also contradicts what Yaakov said at the Jerusalem conference in Acts 15, verses 4 to 29. Compare also with Acts 21:18. So the point being, the Jerusalem Council in Acts 15 appointed no directive that these people had to be functional as Pharisees in order to be acceptable to the community and to be acceptable to God. Rather, the instructions in Acts 15 were very, very minor. In essence, quit the worst of the pagan practices, basically the pagan worship practices of those days. Then get yourself in a synagogue and learn. And you learn as you go. This is what we teach in our synagogue. If you want to come and learn, come and learn. You may get challenged. You may discover that there are certain things you're not as happy with, and you work it through. But the point is that you come and you learn. That's the thing. And eventually you learn to pick up all the important details of what you need to learn to live a holy and just lifestyle by God's standards. This is what the message was in Acts 15. This is the message in Acts where Paul goes back and meets them, and it is determined that he can preach the good news that was given to him by God and through the edict of Yeshua. He can preach to the Gentiles, and they're perfectly good with that. And if Paul's message does not include you have to be Pharisees, then you don't have to be Pharisees. And the point I want to bring up with that is all the stuff that's attached to being Pharisees. Now, how does this apply to today? Modern Orthodox Judaism is very, very similar to Pharisaism of that day, except that they've had 2,000 years to add more rules, or 1,500 years to add more rules to how you should live, to the point where it's extremely demanding, and it's extremely demanding but not necessarily beneficial. We need to look at what the Bible says and ask the Gentiles to live by what the Bible says and go no further. Tradition can be helpful. Tradition can be useful, and we do in our congregation employ a fair bit of tradition, but we don't demand that people do it in order to be acceptable. Great example is, in many households in the congregation, people light candles before sundown on Friday to mark the beginning of Sabbath. Okay, now Pharisaism at that time and Orthodox Judaism of today have many other rules they add to how you do Sabbath. But we do something simple because it makes a great psychological marker for the end of the week and the beginning of Sabbath. So we ask people to consider that, but it's never something that you have to do, and we don't, and we don't put somebody down if they don't do it. So understand that these people came from Yaakov doesn't necessarily mean they were assigned by Yaakov, but they came with the picture, promoting the picture that they have the authority of the Jerusalem congregation to convert everybody to Pharisees, which is clearly not the case. Okay, let me get back onto my thing here. Another possibility is that they falsely represented themselves, I just said that, as having been sent by Yaakov and as speaking on his behalf. It seems quite likely that indeed they did precisely that. Otherwise, Shaul would not have taken such pains, such as in verses 2 through 10, to show that Jerusalem leaders approved of his version of the gospel, not theirs. They were probably the same or from the same group as the men who came down from Judea to Antioch and began teaching the brothers. This is the beginning of Acts 15. you can't be saved unless you get circumcised in the manner prescribed by Moses, a doctrine which brought them into no small amount of discord and dispute with Shaul and Barnabas, and which at the Jerusalem conference resulted in a decision against them in favor of Shaul and Barnabas. Remember, the Jerusalem council ruled in favor of not applying Pharisaism to the Gentiles, okay, which means in modern day times that we should not apply Orthodox rabbinic practice on Gentiles. Okay, in modern times, they, and I put in air quotes there, were from James, meaning that is what they said, but it was not true. And we have to watch out for this all the time. People come in with all kinds of sense of authority or things. This teacher said that, or this tradition says that, and we have to judge each according to the scriptures and to the context. Will it apply because you're Jewish? Will it not apply because you're not Jewish? If you're making a difference, it's very questionable. Okay. Another commentator, I do not think that James sent them, considering Acts 15:24, since we have heard that some from us of our number to whom we gave no instruction have disturbed you with their words, unsetting your souls. Okay, Acts 15:24. So gets back to Peter. This particular verse has a lot of meat on it. So he would eat with the Gentiles. Why would this be a problem? Recall the doctrine of the Pharisees that all Gentiles are inherently idolaters and ritually impure. Only those who met the conditions of Pharisaic oral tradition were considered members of the family of Israel. As a result, Gentile food, wine, and slaughtered meat was completely forbidden. Okay, this is actually true even to today amongst the Orthodox. If you are a Gentile, they will regard you as unclean and really hardly worth their time to even talk to. And the only way that you'll be acceptable to them, only barely, is if you make a conversion, and then you still bear the scarlet letter, the scarlet gimel, I should say, often being still considered a goy even long after you have converted. So understand that this is the basis of the hostility and the distance, and this was very much alive during the time of Yeshua, very much alive during the time of Shaul, where Gentiles were considered inherently unclean. And this is why Peter had a disagreement not only with eating stuff off the sheet in Acts 10, where Peter said even 8 years after Messiah had gone back home, he said, nothing unclean has ever touched my lips. And we know from the story in Acts 10, Peter had to learn that Gentiles were no longer unclean inherently. And so this is the breaking of this doctrine of the Pharisees that God had wanted for Peter to learn, and that's what he learns at the end of Acts 10 and in Acts 11 when he repeats the whole story again. The vision had nothing to do with food; it had everything to do with considering Gentiles clean for the kingdom as Gentiles. Okay, so understand that's the point. Okay, on to the next commentary. Before these people came, Kepha had been eating with the Gentile believers, literally with the Gentiles. But the context of public confrontation implies that all, or nearly all, of those present were believers, for it is unlikely that Shaul would air dirty laundry before unbelievers. This is important, for it is not to be thought that Kepha had abandoned Jewish tradition and now ignored keeping kosher, so that he ate with any and all Gentiles whenever he felt like it. His loyalty to kashrut, which is the kosher laws, has been such that nothing trafe had ever touched his lips prior to seeing Cornelius. For this we have his word spoken while he was seeing a vision, Acts 10, verses 12 to 15, and reportedly afterwards by him, but into other believers. Okay, Acts 11, 10 to 5 to 10. Accordingly, the laws of kashrut remain. The Messianic community has not ignored them. Okay, now this is a citation of somebody else's someone else's commentary, and so I didn't change anything in it. But let me. I would ask you to consider that last line. Accordingly, the laws of kashrut remain. I would add the word biblical in there. Biblical, not traditional, because there's much of traditional kashrut which is not biblical, and it's derived from the teachings of men rather than the instruction of God. And so, not that we should completely ignore it, but on the other hand, we need to understand it is of secondary importance compared to biblical kashrut. And when there is an issue, we default to the biblical kashrut, and the rest of it is optional if you choose to follow that. And not everybody does, and certainly no one needs to. The only difference would be somebody like Paul, who is trying to maintain an absolute purity in his walk, would keep strictly kosher, even by Pharisaic traditions, because he identified himself as a Pharisee, and he used that identification in proclaiming the good news. Okay? The citation from Acts 21, verses 20 and 21. Upon hearing it, they praised God, but said to him, "You see, brother, how many tens of thousands of believers there are among the Judeans, and they are all zealous for the Torah." They are all zealous for the Torah. Now, I'm repeating that because it's commonly taught that with the coming of the Spirit of God, everybody chucked their Bibles and started inventing a new religion. Here it says they're all zealous. The believers are zealous for the Torah. Just let that sink in. Okay, so should we? Yeah. Now what they have been told about you, talking about Paul, is that you are teaching all the Jews living among the Goyim to apostatize from Moshe, telling them not to have a Brit Milah for their sons and not to follow the traditions. Okay. Now, what's the true answer here? The true answer is not all the traditions were being followed, but the accusation is that Paul is teaching the Jews living among the Goyim to depart from following Moshe and telling them not to have the circumcision for their sons. Now, this is different than the circumcision of the conversion, which is the topic of Galatians. A reminder, the word circumcision there does not guarantee the biblical circumcision, but rather in its context talks about the conversion. The last thing you do in order to be fully converted to becoming a Pharisee is to take a circumcision. Why? Because a few days before, if not a week before, you were baptized and went down a Gentile and you came up a Jew. And being a new creation, a new birth, what he's supposed to do is to circumcise within 8 days. So that's the tradition. And so the circumcision in Paul's argument to the Galatian congregations was not the circumcision of God in the Bible, but rather the circumcision of the Pharisees making the conversion to Pharisaism and all the obligations. I'm going to keep repeating that because it's a very important arguing point. Pretty much every time we talk about this. Sorry about that. Okay. So the allegation has nothing to do with keeping Torah, the commandments of God, but rather keeping the traditions of the Pharisees. And Paul Paul was teaching that the traditions of the Pharisees were not binding and obligatory, but the commandments of God in the Bible are. Okay. Another commentary, Dr. Stern. The Messianic Jew Daniel Klutstein has offered an alternative understanding. The problem may not have been whether fellowship between Jews and Gentile believers is more compelling than kosher, but whether it is more compelling than ritual purity. Today it is hard to appreciate how important purity was in first century Jewish life, although the fact that 1/6 of the Talmud is devoted to this subject ought to give an indication. Yeah, there's 3 main sections in the Mishnah, and the third one is almost entirely on items of ritual purity. Consider that Kepha went frequently to the temple, who would not have been able to enter in a ritually impure state, but eating with Gentiles and being in their homes would render him impure and thus subject to criticism by the picky. A major point of Acts 10 and 11 is that Gentile believers in Yeshua were purified by God, so that Kepha learned to regard himself as ritually pure when eating with them. But before the overtly critical Jews from Yaakov, because of the overly critical Jews from Yaakov, he backed off and became a hypocrite, or at least was intimidated into not being true to what he believed, which is either way a hypocrite. Okay, point is that if Peter had been eating with the Gentiles, he had no trouble with the ritual purity of the Gentiles. Now, there's an assumption in this that the Gentiles had followed God's teaching to the point where they were kosher enough to not have a problem with Peter eating with them. Because even Paul never mentions having trouble eating with Gentiles. The only option would be the question over whether or not the meat you're serving in your house came from a meat store that may have bought their meat from a pagan temple. That's pretty much the one and only issue. The rest of it was no question whether or not they were eating kosher. And so that's important to understand. There was an assumption of kosher in that argument. Okay, of the circumcision, the peritome, the circumcised, again, Dr. Stern, the faction that favored circumcision of Gentile believers, literally the circumcision. Okay, but this cannot here mean simply the Jews as it does in verses 7 to 9. For all the principals, Shaul, Kepha, Barnabas, and the other Jewish believers were Jews too, and circumcised. Rather, this is the group who insisted that Gentiles must become Jews before they can believe in Yeshua. The group referred to in my translation at 3 other places as the circumcision faction, from Acts 10, 45, 11, 2, and Titus 1:10. Okay. So not the Jews, but specifically the Pharisees who demanded Gentiles convert to Pharisaism, with the final act being Pharisaic circumcision, not the biblical commandment. That's my commentary. Also, this makes an interesting possibility. For Peter to be afraid of the Pharisees, it may have been he still considered himself to be a Pharisee, although on vacation while away from Jerusalem. Stories abound of Jewish people who are kosher in their home, but when they go out to eat, kosher is off. And this is possibly another thing. To me, it makes sense that either Peter had wanted to protect his standing with the Pharisees who came up from Jerusalem, or would to a lesser degree, was on vacation. In other words, sneaking a little bacon while they were, eating away from home. That's less of a possibility. The greater one, I think, is just fear of being ratted out by the Pharisees when they got back to Jerusalem. that Peter was actually hanging out with in their what they call unclean Gentiles. Um, and then Peter having to deal with that when he gets back home. Um, verse 13, and the rest of the Jews also played the hypocrite with him, so that even Barnabas was carried away with their hypocrisy. Okay, played the hypocrite. Synpokrinomai. I will forever apologize for massacring all the Greek, but it is what it is for now. To disguise or conceal something, to feign, to deliberately ignore something, to pretend not to notice, to falsely hide one's opinions or feelings. Sounds like a political description. The hypocrisy was withdrawing from the Gentiles as if there was something wrong with them to appear froom to the Pharisaic Messianics. Okay, froom is a Yiddish word which simply means kosher in every way. Somebody who is froom is meticulous in their kosher and in how they approach the holy days, the special days, the Sabbath days. Everything they do is specifically and dedicated to following the traditions. That makes somebody froom. Okay, so Peter is possibly trying to maintain the idea that he's supposed to be froom in front of these guys, or that Barnabas got sucked into this too, that he even got carried away and started practicing the hypocrisy. Okay, verse 14. Okay, it doesn't excuse the hypocrisy. It just means don't do it. And even leaders of the congregation can fall into that hypocrisy. So it means that none of us are perfect. Okay, verse 14. When I saw that they were not straightforward about the truth of the gospel, I said to Peter before them all, if you, being a Jew, live in the manner of Gentiles and not as the Jews, why do you compel Gentiles to live as Jews? Okay. Not straightforward, because orthopodeo, not to walk uprightly. Probably a hint of the Hebrew phrase yashar, which means straight, upright, or correct, or right. Also, as used in Devarim, Deuteronomy 6:18, you are to do what is right, that is upright, and good in the sight of Adonai, so that things will go well with you, and you will enter and possess the good land Adonai swore to your ancestors. It's also the name of a person. There's a pseudepigraphal book. Pseudepigrapha means false named or false writing. Of a book named Jasher. It's the same root word in Hebrew, meaning upright or straight or correct. It's kind of more of a architectural or construction term to be upright. You know, the same way that someone would use a plumb bob or nowadays a laser to make sure that what you're building is exactly straight up and down. Okay. Paul's rebuke toward Peter was a stinging reminder that we Yehudim, I should probably explain what that is. Yehudim, Jews, are here to confirm the renewed written covenant of Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, Yehovah, and not here to determine who was fit for its acceptance based on their commitment to rabbinic Judaism and decrees, or in modern terms, acceptance based on cultural mores imposed by a religious group on its members or anyone else for that matter. Okay, what does this mean? That we go back to the rebuke, little piece of sarcasm. You're a Jew, but you live like a Gentile. Okay, not like a Jew, you live like a Gentile. So why do you want Gentiles to live like something you aren't doing? That's basically what he's saying. You're not doing it, so why do you want Gentiles to do this? So there's a difference between Torah and tradition. And we need to know that Galatians is full of that argument. That's the entire argument of Galatians, is that you don't have to become a Pharisee to be right with God, because you don't need the traditions to be right with God. All you need is Torah. Okay? And yeah, I'll be saying that over and over again. Okay? Okay, then last comment. The truth of the gospel, in this case, the truth is one. The truth is, one does not need to be a Pharisee to be in the family, a concept placed in jeopardy by Peter's withdrawal from the Gentile believers. Peter's conduct requires Gentile believers to apprehend that their acceptance before God through Jesus' death and resurrection is insufficient in Jewish eyes, and that the Jewish community, as represented by the party of circumcision, whose views Peter, Barnabas, and the rest have temporarily adopted, will not recognize them unless they formally join its ranks. This is the difficulty we face today. This is the difficulty then. The Orthodox will tell you you're not going to be fully acceptable to God until you become Orthodox like them. And they'll tell that all the time. And the difficulty is, sadly, that statement works because people are so much wanting. Good morning, Ishai. Good afternoon. Yes, thank you. It's working finally. I turned off. I think I turned off the video of my face, and apparently things are working a lot better now. So I'm going to keep it that way. You don't have to look at me anyways. So anyways, again, let me back up a little bit because I mangled the reading on this. Peter's conduct requires Gentile believers to apprehend that their acceptance before God through Jesus' death and resurrection is insufficient in Jewish eyes. Okay, let me stop there. Okay, Paul's complaint is that Peter's conduct makes this statement. Not that Peter's making this statement, but his conduct makes the statement. Okay? And that the Jewish community won't accept the Gentiles unless they make this full conversion, concluding with the Pharisaic, or in modern times, the Orthodox circumcision. Okay? This was clearly wrong. And Paul stood against Peter to make that point. Okay? The fact that nobody has contradicted Paul in the writings of the Bible or in the history of the Bible, one is left on the unchallenged assumption that Paul was right to do what he did. In a court of law, an uncontested statement is considered as fact, and that's human court of law. But the idea is essentially the same idea. If what Paul had said is so dangerous and so damaging, apparently nobody contradicted him on this point. So it was wrong for Peter to withdraw from Gentiles, that is, to not be involved fully with Gentiles only because they weren't Pharisees and fully culturally attuned to all the traditions of Pharisaism. It was wrong for them to do that, including Peter. So that's the bottom line. Now we get to move on, starting next week, next lesson, into something a little more moving forward and a little less looking back on the explanation. But you can see by the strain that Paul's going through on this, that it was necessary for him to really work out this detail of why he has status to write what he has to say what he has to say, and to the point even of standing against Peter's hypocrisy, that he had standing to do this, so that everything else he says in this letter has standing and has value and has a certain amount of authority to it. And that's why we need to We need to accept that he goes through this long explanation with this big sidestep that we just finished. So next week we get into more of the meat of the issue, as if we haven't already, and we get into more of the argument of why it's wrong to make conversion to Pharisaism of that day and to Orthodox of this day, why it's wrong to do so. Okay. All right. That's all I have to say. Any questions, comments, or rebukes? Oops, wrong thing. Why am I in the wrong spot? Oh, that's right. Duh. Okay, let me see if I can recover my thing here. Okay. So last chance. Any questions, comments, rebukes? Yishai, you have the floor if you want it. I'm not sure what size of delay we have today, but it's okay. Well, this one is sort of a test drive for the technology. We can start advertising again that we're up and running. So God willing, everything works well, and we'll get back to it. Just a reminder, we're not going on Saturday online for a live chat. We're meeting over at the park for now. I am requesting that we get back into our regular place that we rent, but I haven't heard back officially yet, so I'm still waiting on news for that. Until then, we're going to meet Saturdays at the park right there at Cameron Park, just half a block down the street from where we normally meet. And we're just going to meet informally. We did that this last Sabbath. Worked out really well. Very nice and comfortable. No one messed with us. And it was good. Okay. So, any other questions, comments, rebukes? I'll give it a minute or two of silence, and then we'll close down if there's nothing more to say. Okay? All right. Shalom. I have to remember when it's okay. When I'm doing my review, preparing for this, I need to blow up the font. As some of these, in order to fit everything down on a handout of 2 pages only, I closed down the font a lot on some of these, and this one realized, part way into it, man, this is hard to read. It's tiny font, and I have the page shrunk down to be a half a page. You're quite welcome, Yishai. God bless you, and we'll see you next time we see you. Okay? Shalom. So I just have to remind myself to bring it back up to a 12-point font so it's legible. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and shut it down then. So we can close that. We can close. Oop. What'd I do? Okay, let's do that first. Let's end the stream.